Welcome to the Pulse Point News. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon for more updates and thrilling short scenes. In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court redefined the boundaries of presidential power, sending shockwaves through the nation. The case, Learning Resources versus Trump, was more than a legal dispute. It was a test of America's checks and balances. At stake, whether a president could unilaterally impose sweeping tariffs in the name of national security, bypassing Congress's explicit authority over commerce. The Trump administration argued for broad executive power, while a coalition of businesses and states warned of dangerous overreach. The tariffs had already raised prices and disrupted supply chains, making the case a kitchen table issue for millions. The court's ruling would either validate this strategy or force a dramatic reversal, with billions at stake. Ultimately, the decision was about the very structure of American government, reminding the nation that no branch is above the law. The Supreme Court wasn't just interpreting a statute, it was defining the limits of presidential power for generations to come. Tariffs, taxes on imported goods, have long been used to protect domestic industries, shielding them from foreign competition and helping local businesses stay afloat in a global marketplace. But President Trump wielded them as a primary weapon of economic policy, elevating tariffs from a rarely used tool to the centerpiece of his administration's strategy. He argued that massive tariffs would force other countries to change their trade practices and bring jobs back to the U.S., promising a revival of American industry and a new era of prosperity for workers. On Liberation Day, April 2, 2025, Trump announced tariffs of 10% to 50% on a vast array of imports, targeting allies and rivals alike, and sending shockwaves through international markets. This was not a targeted measure, but a sweeping assault on global supply chains, disrupting established trade relationships and raising uncertainty for businesses worldwide. The administration claimed these tariffs would generate revenue, revive American manufacturing, and reduce the nation's dependence on foreign goods. Critics saw it as economic warfare, warning of higher prices for consumers, global retaliation, and the risk of sparking a trade war that could hurt American families and businesses. Trump's approach marked a sharp break from decades of bipartisan support for free trade, overturning a long-standing consensus that open markets benefit the U.S. economy. He championed economic nationalism, making tariffs central to his America First agenda, and rallying supporters who felt left behind by globalization. The move polarized the nation, with supporters cheering protectionism and opponents fearing economic chaos, as debates raged in Congress, on cable news, and in communities across the country. The Supreme Court would soon decide if this bold and controversial strategy was constitutional, setting the stage for a historic legal battle. To bypass Congress, Trump invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, declaring trade deficits a national emergency. IEEPA was designed for targeted sanctions, not sweeping economic policy. The administration argued that persistent trade deficits and cross-border threats justified emergency action. Critics countered that this stretched the law beyond recognition, letting the president sidestep Congress's power to tax and regulate commerce. If a trade deficit is an emergency, they warned, any problem could justify unilateral executive action. The legal battle set the stage for a historic clash over the separation of powers. The Supreme Court now faced a fundamental question: can a president use emergency powers to reshape the economy? The tariffs hit American consumers first. Prices on everyday goods soared. Economic studies showed that U.S. importers and families, not foreign countries, bore the brunt. Businesses relying on imported parts faced skyrocketing costs, forcing tough choices: raise prices, cut jobs, or close shop. Small businesses were especially vulnerable, unable to absorb sudden cost hikes. Retaliatory tariffs from other countries devastated American exporters, especially farmers. Soybean, pork, and dairy exports plummeted, causing catastrophic losses in rural America. The trade war created uncertainty, chilling investment and hiring. Industry groups warned that the instability was harming the economy more than the trade deficits ever did. The ripple effects touched every sector, revealing the deep interconnectedness of the global marketplace. The tariffs, meant to protect, often hurt the very people they aimed to help. Leading economists, including former Fed chairs, filed briefs warning that the tariffs would damage the U.S. economy. They argued that trade deficits are normal in a global economy, not a national emergency. The experts predicted higher prices, lost jobs, and trillions in economic harm. Former judges and national security officials joined the opposition, warning of dangerous precedents and risks to alliances. Democratic-led states argued the tariffs were an illegal tax, violating Congress's constitutional authority. Lower courts had already ruled against the administration's use of IEPA. The opposition was broad and bipartisan, uniting economists, legal scholars, and state governments. The case was no longer just about tariffs. It was about the rule of law and the separation of powers. The Supreme Court's decision would have consequences far beyond trade policy. In a packed Supreme Court, the constitutional conflict came into sharp focus. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as both sides prepared to present their arguments. The administration argued that the president must act swiftly in emergencies, and that EPA gave me big ham broad discreditro estes progression. They emphasized the need for quick, decisive action in times of national crisis. The challengers countered that only Congress can impose taxes and regulate commerce, a core principle of the Constitution. They warned that unchecked executive power could undermine the very foundation of American democracy. Justices pressed both sides. Could any economic problem be declared an emergency? They sought to understand the limits of presidential power in such scenarios. Where should the line be drawn? This question was at the heart of the debate, challenging the court to define the boundaries of executive authority. The debate centered on whether IEPA's broad language could override the Constitution's careful division of powers. The justices had to consider the implications of their decision on future presidencies. The challengers urged the court to interpret the law in a way that preserved congressional authority. They argued that maintaining this balance was crucial for the integrity of the legislative process. The administration insisted Congress had delegated this power and could take it back if it wished. They maintained that the president was acting within the scope of his delegated authority. The justices grappled with the tension between statutory authority and constitutional limits. Their decision would have far-reaching consequences for the separation of powers. At stake was not just tariff policy, but the future of executive power. The ruling would set a precedent for how much control a president could wield in times of crisis. The court faced a defining choice: uphold a sweeping view of presidential authority, or reaffirm Congress's central role. The decision would shape the balance of power between the branches of government. The nation waited for a decision that would shape the balance of power for years to come. The outcome would influence the dynamics of American governance and the future of its democratic principles. On October 25, 2025, the Supreme Court delivered a historic 6-3 ruling against the Trump administration, sending shockwaves through Washington and the nation. Chief Justice Roberts, writing for the majority, declared that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act does not grant the president authority to impose sweeping tariffs that override Congress's fundamental powers over trade and taxation. The court drew a clear and decisive line. Chronic economic issues like trade deficits, no matter how serious, do not constitute national emergencies under the law and cannot be used to justify extraordinary executive action. The decision forced the government to refund billions in illegal tariffs, providing long-awaited relief to businesses across the country, but also creating new fiscal challenges for the Treasury and raising questions about future budget priorities. The ruling set in motion a complex process of unwinding the tariffs, restoring more stable trade relationships with key partners, and rebuilding trust in the global marketplace. The future of U.S. trade policy now shifted back to Congress, where lawmakers face difficult choices and an uncertain path forward in a rapidly changing world economy. The decision stands as a major check on presidential power, reaffirming Congress's constitutional role in economic policymaking and setting a precedent for future administrations. Future presidents, regardless of party or political agenda, are now clearly constrained from using emergency statutes as a shortcut for sweeping domestic policies that bypass the legislative process. For Americans, the case is a vivid lesson in constitutional governance, the enduring importance of the separation of powers, and the ongoing need for civic vigilance. The Supreme Court's ruling is a powerful reminder that in America, the rule of law and the Constitution prevail over the will of any one leader, safeguarding democracy for future generations.